The conference hall on the Galactic Council station gleamed with lights from 1,000 different worlds. Ambassador Laura Mitchell stood at the podium, her hands gripping the sides as she addressed the 12 alien species that controlled this part of the galaxy. She had prepared for this moment for months, rehearsing every word, every gesture. Earth wanted to join the Galactic Council. Humanity wanted to be part of something bigger than themselves. Laura spoke about Earth's achievements, about the technological advances they could share, about the cultural richness humanity could bring to the galactic community. She talked about peace, cooperation, and mutual growth. The holographic displays behind her showed images of Earth, beautiful blue oceans, green forests, and cities that touched the sky. She showed them art, music, and scientific discoveries, everything that made humanity special. The council members listened in silence. Some appeared interested, others looked bored. High Commander Vrektar of the Zalthine Empire sat in the largest seat, his forearms crossed over his chest. His species had ruled their corner of space for 3,000 years. They were warriors, conquerors, and they looked at humanity the way a lion might look at an insect. When Laura finished her presentation, the voting began. The results came quickly. 10 species voted against Earth's membership. Only 2 voted in favor. The Zalthine vote was the final nail in the coffin. Vrektar stood and declared that humanity was too primitive, too young, too unpredictable to join the council. The decision was final. Laura felt her heart sink but kept her composure. She thanked the council for their time and left the chamber with dignity. Deep inside, she felt disappointed but not defeated. There would be other chances. Humanity would prove themselves worthy eventually. 3 weeks passed. Life on Earth continued as normal. People went to work, children went to school, and humanity kept reaching for the stars. On the colony world of New Haven, 2.3 million people had built a life far from Earth. The planet had clear skies, rich soil, and endless possibilities. Families lived in comfortable homes, farmers grew crops that fed thousands, and scientists studied the unique ecosystem. Captain Jake Morrison ran the defense station that orbited New Haven. It was not a military installation, just a simple platform with basic weapons meant to deal with asteroids and space debris. Jake was a veteran of Earth's space program, a man in his late 40s with gray hair and tired eyes. He had seen a lot in his career, but he never expected war. The morning started like any other. Jake was drinking coffee and reviewing supply reports when the alarms screamed. His console lit up with red warnings. Ships were coming out of hyperspace, dozens of them, all bearing Zalthine military signatures. Jake's blood ran cold. He immediately tried to hail the incoming fleet, demanding to know their intentions. War Marshal Thokren answered the call. His face appeared on the screen, cruel and emotionless. He did not waste time with explanations. The Zalthine had decided that New Haven violated their territorial claims. The colony would be destroyed as a lesson to humanity about respecting boundaries. Jake tried to argue, tried to explain that New Haven was in neutral space, far from any Zalthine territory. Thokren cut the transmission. The bombardment began within minutes. Massive energy beams struck the planet's surface, turning cities into craters. Jake watched helplessly as the defense station's weak weapons did nothing against the Zalthine shields. He immediately sent out evacuation orders to the colony below. Every ship, every shuttle, every vehicle that could fly was launched into space. 40,000 people made it off the planet. 40,000 out of 2.3 million. Jake coordinated the evacuation from his station, directing the fleeing ships to safe coordinates. He stayed at his post even as explosions rocked the station. Debris flew past his windows. Fires broke out in 3 sections. His crew abandoned ship, but Jake remained, making sure every last evacuation ship got clear. The Zalthine fleet fired on the defense station. The structure broke apart, metal twisting and tearing. Jake was thrown from his chair as the station died around him. He grabbed an emergency suit and made it to an escape pod, just as the main reactor exploded. The pod launched into space, tumbling through the debris field. A freight ship found him hours later, floating among the wreckage. The crew pulled him aboard and gave him medical attention. Jake lay on the medical bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the people he could not save. 2.26 million dead. Men, women, children, entire families wiped out in a matter of hours. When news reached Earth, the planet went silent. Every channel showed the same images. Satellites captured footage of New Haven burning. The cities were gone, replaced by smoking ruins. The farms were ash. The schools, hospitals, homes, all destroyed. Humanity sat in their living rooms and watched their people die over and over again. Ambassador Laura Mitchell demanded an emergency session with the Galactic Council. She traveled back to the station, this time not to ask for membership but to demand justice. The council convened and Laura stood before them again. This time her voice was not hopeful, it was furious. She showed them the evidence. She played the recordings of Jake's conversation with Thokran. She displayed the territorial maps proving New Haven was in neutral space. She presented testimonies from the survivors. Everything proved that the Zalthine had lied about territorial violations. This was not a border dispute. This was genocide. High Commander Vrektar sat in his seat and showed no emotion. When Laura finished, he stood and addressed the council. He claimed the Zalthine Empire had every right to defend their borders. He said humanity should have been more careful about where they placed their colonies. He suggested that perhaps this tragedy could have been avoided if Earth had been more respectful of galactic powers. The council voted on sanctions against the Zalthine. The result was a symbolic censure, a formal statement of disapproval with no actual consequences. No military intervention, no reparations, no justice. The Zalthine were too powerful, and the council was too afraid to challenge them. Laura Mitchell left the chamber in silence. She returned to Earth and reported to President Daniel Carter. The message was clear and devastating. Humanity was alone. The galaxy did not care about human lives. The Galactic Council would not help. If Earth wanted justice for New Haven, they would have to take it themselves. President Carter called an emergency session of the United Earth Assembly. Representatives from every nation gathered in Geneva. The mood was dark, angry, and determined. Carter addressed them with simple words. The galaxy had shown its true face. Peace had failed. Diplomacy had failed. Now it was time for humanity to show the galaxy what humans could do when their families were murdered, and no one cared. President Daniel Carter stood before the assembly and declared a state of emergency. His voice was calm, but everyone could hear the steel beneath it. The Galactic Council had abandoned humanity. The Zalthine Empire had murdered millions of innocent people. Earth would not forgive. Earth would not forget. And Earth would make sure the galaxy understood that humans protect their own. The declaration passed with unanimous support. Every nation on Earth agreed. Politics, old rivalries, and disagreements were set aside. Humanity had one goal now: make the Zalthine pay for what they did to New Haven, show the galaxy that humans were not weak prey to be hunted without consequence. Admiral Helen Brooks received the appointment as Supreme Commander of the new human Retribution Fleet. She was a career military officer, 53 years old, with sharp eyes and a reputation for being absolutely ruthless when necessary. President Carter gave her unlimited authority and unlimited resources. Every shipyard on Earth, every factory in orbit, every research facility on Mars and Luna, all of it was hers to command. Helen accepted the position without hesitation. She had lost a nephew on New Haven, a young man who had been studying xenobiology at the Colony University. He was 22 years old and had his whole life ahead of him. Now he was ash floating in the atmosphere of a dead world. Helen would make sure his death, and the deaths of all the others, meant something. The industrial machine of Earth roared to life. Construction yards that once built cargo ships and passenger liners now produced warships. Factories that made consumer goods switched to military equipment. The economy transformed overnight. People worked longer hours without complaint. They knew what they were building and why it mattered. Dr. Nathan Cross led the weapons development program. He was a physicist who had spent his career studying theoretical applications of gravity manipulation and molecular engineering. Before New Haven, his work was purely academic. Now it had a purpose. The Galactic Council had rules about warfare, conventions that limited certain weapons, technologies considered too cruel or destructive. Nathan threw those rules in the trash. His team developed nanoplague warheads, microscopic machines that could consume ship hulls and shields at the molecular level. They created gravity well generators that could tear vessels apart by creating localized gravitational anomalies. They designed hunter drones, AI-guided weapons that would pursue a target forever, never stopping, never giving up, programmed to destroy specific ships or installations. Nathan felt no guilt about creating these weapons. The Zalthine had shown no mercy to the children of New Haven, so Earth would show no mercy in return. He worked 18-hour days, pushing his team to perfect every design. When other scientists questioned the ethics of their creations, Nathan reminded them of the footage from New Haven. The argument stopped. Commander Lisa Hayes volunteered for the most dangerous assignment. She would infiltrate Zalthine space, gather intelligence, and identify targets for the coming assault. Lisa was an expert in covert operations, a woman who could blend into any environment and extract information without being detected. She had been born on New Haven and evacuated when she was 15 during a previous colonial relocation. The planet had been her childhood home. Lisa traveled alone in a modified scout ship, using false identification and cover stories to move through alien space. She posed as a traitor, a mercenary, a refugee, whatever role got her close to Zalthine military installations. She observed their patrol patterns, studied their communication protocols, and identified weaknesses in their defense networks. What she discovered gave humanity hope. The Zalthine Empire was powerful but complacent. They had been the dominant military force in their region for so long that they had grown lazy. Their tactics were outdated, their security was full of holes, and their commanders were arrogant. They believed no one could challenge them. Lisa smiled coldly as she compiled her reports. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Captain Jake Morrison could not stay away from the military preparation. After being rescued from New Haven, he had spent 2 weeks in a hospital recovering from his injuries. Doctors told him to rest, to take time to process the trauma. Jake ignored them. He volunteered to join the Retribution fleet the day he was released from medical care. Admiral Brooks personally approved his application. She knew Jake's story. She knew he had stayed at his post while his station disintegrated around him, making sure others could escape. She needed officers like that, people who understood sacrifice and duty. Jake was assigned to captain one of the new warships, a vessel designed for one purpose: overwhelming destructive power. Lieutenant Sophie Grant joined Jake's crew. She was a young officer, only 28, but she had topped her class in tactical operations. Sophie had lost her parents and 2 sisters on New Haven. They had been teachers at a school in the capital city. Sophie spoke very little about her loss. She did not need to. Everyone on the Retribution fleet carried the same pain. Sergeant Ryan Tucker led the Marine contingent assigned to Jake's ship. Ryan was a combat veteran who had served in Earth's security forces for 15 years. He was a big man, strong and intimidating, but his crew knew he cared deeply about every person under his command. Ryan trained his Marines with brutal efficiency. They would board enemy ships, secure enemy facilities, and show no quarter to anyone who resisted. The construction of the fleet took 18 months. 200 warships, each equipped with weapons that violated every galactic convention. The ships were not elegant or beautiful. They were functional, brutal, and terrifying. Gray hulls covered in weapon ports, engines designed for speed and maneuverability, and shields strong enough to take massive punishment. Jake stood on the bridge of his ship, the ECS Vengeance, and ran his hands over the console. Everything was new, clean, and ready for battle. His crew moved through their stations with practiced efficiency. Sophie stood at the tactical station, monitoring the weapon systems. Ryan prepared his Marines in the armory below. They were ready. Admiral Brooks called a meeting of all ship captains 2 days before launch. She stood before them in the command center of Earth's orbital station and looked at each face. These were people who had lost everything. These were people who wanted revenge. She understood that feeling because she shared it. Her orders were simple and direct. The fleet would jump to the Zalthine home system. They would destroy every military installation they encountered. They would capture or kill everyone responsible for the New Haven massacre. They would show the Zalthine Empire what it meant to murder human families. And they would show the Galactic Council that humanity would never again tolerate injustice. The captains listened in silence. No one objected. No one questioned the morality of what they were about to do. The time for questions had passed. The time for mercy had ended on New Haven. Now was the time for retribution. Jake returned to his ship and assembled his crew. He gave them one last chance to back out. Anyone who felt uncomfortable with the mission could transfer to different duties with no judgment. No one moved. No one spoke. They all knew what they had signed up for. The launch day arrived. 200 warships powered up their engines. Families gathered in observation decks to watch the fleet depart. There were no celebrations, no cheering crowds. People watched silently as the ships moved into formation. This was not a glorious moment. This was necessary, grim, and final. President Carter broadcast one last message to the fleet. He thanked them for their service. He reminded them that they carried the hopes of every human who mourned New Haven. He told them to come home safe. And he gave them permission to do whatever was necessary to achieve their mission. Admiral Brooks sat in her command chair on the flagship and gave the order. The fleet jumped to hyperspace, leaving Earth behind. They were heading toward the Zalthine Empire. They were heading toward war. And they would not stop until justice was served. The human retribution fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Zalthine home system. 200 warships appeared simultaneously, their weapons powered and shields active. The Zalthine defenders were completely unprepared. Their sensors screamed warnings, but by then it was already too late. Admiral Helen Brooks sat in her command chair and opened a broadcast channel to the Zalthine homeworld. Her message was brief and cold. For New Haven, there would be no mercy. For the 2.26 million dead, there would be justice. The Zalthine had started this war, and humanity would finish it. She gave them no chance to respond before cutting the transmission. Captain Jake Morrison commanded the ECS Vengeance at the front of the assault formation. His orders were clear. Destroy the outer defense platform known as Zalthor Station. The massive installation had protected the Zalthine home system for centuries. It bristled with weapons and housed over 5,000 military personnel. Jake looked at it through his view screen and felt nothing but determination. The Zalthine defenders scrambled to respond. Warships launched from the station's docking bays. Defense turrets came online and targeted the human fleet. War Marshal Thokran, the Butcher of New Haven himself, commanded the station. His voice came over the communication channels, demanding that the humans retreat or face destruction. Jake did not bother responding. He gave the order to fire. The Vengeance unleashed Dr. Nathan Cross's nanoplague warheads. The missiles struck the station's shields and released trillions of microscopic machines. The nanobots consumed the energy barriers at the molecular level, breaking down the shield generators in seconds. The supposedly impenetrable defenses vanished like morning mist. The Zalthine defenders stared at their consoles in confusion. Nothing in their experience prepared them for this. Shields were not supposed to fail that quickly. They tried to recalibrate to boost power, but nothing worked. The nanobots spread across the station's hull, consuming weapon systems and sensor arrays. Lieutenant Sophie Grant activated the gravity well generators. These weapons were Nathan's most terrifying creation. They created localized gravitational anomalies that pulled matter in impossible directions. 3 generators fired simultaneously at Zalthor Station. The massive structure groaned as different sections were pulled in different directions. Metal twisted and tore. Entire sections of the station collapsed inward. The hunter drones launched next. Thousands of small AI-guided missiles, each programmed to seek out life support systems and engine cores. They swarmed through the debris field like angry insects, targeting every Zalthine ship that tried to escape. Explosions lit up space as the drones found their targets. One by one, the defending warships died. 3 hours into the battle, Zalthor Station broke apart completely. The debris field stretched for hundreds of kilometers. Jake watched the destruction on his screens and felt no satisfaction, only grim necessity. This was what the Zalthine had done to New Haven. Now they understood how it felt. War Marshal Thokran attempted to flee in his personal flagship. He abandoned the station and his troops, running like the coward he was. Lieutenant Sophie Grant tracked his ship through hyperspace using the new sensor systems Lisa Hayes had helped develop during her intelligence gathering. Sophie smiled without humor as she locked onto his trajectory. The murderer of New Haven would not escape. Jake ordered a pursuit team. 6 fast attack ships broke formation and followed Thokran into hyperspace. Sophie went with them, commanding one of the pursuit vessels. She had waited 18 months for this moment. The chase led them to a mining colony on the edge of Zalthine space. Thokran thought he could hide among the civilian traffic. He was wrong. The human ships surrounded his flagship and disabled its engines with precise weapons fire. They did not destroy the vessel. Admiral Brooks wanted Thokran alive to face trial. Boarding pods launched from the attack ships. Sergeant Ryan Tucker led the assault team. His Marines cut through the flagship's hull and fought their way to the command deck. The Zalthine defenders tried to resist, but they were not prepared for human close combat tactics. Ryan and his team moved through the ship like a storm, overwhelming every defensive position. They used stun weapons rather than lethal force, following their orders to take prisoners. Within an hour, they had secured the flagship. Jake Morrison personally boarded Thokran's ship. He walked through the smoke-filled corridors and climbed to the command deck. The war marshal was there, wounded and surrounded by unconscious crew members. Thokran looked up at Jake with his 4 eyes and tried to speak. He claimed he was just following orders from High Commander Frektar. He said he had no choice. He begged for mercy. Jake stared at him for a long moment. He thought about the 40,000 survivors he had helped evacuate from New Haven. He thought about the 2.26 million who had not made it. He thought about families torn apart, children who died in terror, dreams that turned to ash. Then he spoke in a voice as cold as the void outside. So were we, following orders. Thokran was placed in restraints and taken aboard the Vengeance. Jake returned to his bridge and reported the capture to Admiral Brooks. She acknowledged and gave new orders. The fleet would push deeper into Zalthine space. There were 12 major military installations still operational. All of them would be destroyed. Commander Lisa Hayes coordinated the next wave of attacks from the flagship. Using the intelligence she had gathered over the past year, she identified the most critical targets. Shipyards where the Zalthine built their warships, command centers where they coordinated fleet movements, weapons development facilities where they designed new technologies. All of it would burn. The human fleet split into smaller task forces and struck simultaneously across multiple systems. The Zalthine military, already reeling from the loss of Zalthor Station, could not respond effectively. They were fighting enemies on a dozen fronts at once. Every time they gathered forces to counterattack, the humans vanished into hyperspace and appeared somewhere else. Sergeant Ryan Tucker led ground forces that assaulted and captured 3 weapons facilities. His Marines secured advanced Zalthine technology, weapons, shields, and engine designs. Earth would study these systems and improve their own ships. Ryan took particular satisfaction in dismantling the research labs. These were the places where the Zalthine had designed the weapons used to burn New Haven. The Zalthine Empire, which had dominated their region of space for 3,000 years, began to collapse. Their military infrastructure was in ruins. Their fleets were scattered and demoralized. Civilian populations on Zalthine worlds watched the news in horror as human warships appeared in system after system, destroying everything military they found while carefully avoiding civilian targets. High Commander Rektar issued desperate pleas from the Zalthine homeworld. He begged for a ceasefire. He offered reparations. He promised justice for those responsible for New Haven. Admiral Brooks received his transmissions and ignored every single one. Words were meaningless now. The Zalthine had proven that when they destroyed a human colony, now Earth was responding in the only language the galaxy seemed to understand. Force.news of humanity's campaign spread across the galaxy at faster-than-light speeds. The Galactic Council watched in shocked silence as the species they had dismissed as primitive and weak brought the mighty Zalthine Empire to its knees. Ambassador Laura Mitchell received reports from her intelligence sources. The other Council species were terrified. They had never seen warfare like this. Humans fought with a brutality and efficiency that was supposed to be impossible for such a young species. Captain Jake Morrison led his ship through battle after battle. The Vengeance earned a reputation across Zalthine space. Wherever it appeared, destruction followed. Jake felt neither pride nor guilt about this. He was simply doing what needed to be done. The galaxy had taught humanity a harsh lesson. Now humanity was teaching one in return. After 6 weeks of continuous operations, the human fleet stood at the edge of the Zalthine home system again. This time they faced no resistance. The orbital defenses were destroyed. The defense fleets were gone. The once mighty empire was broken. Admiral Brooks broadcast one final message to the Zalthine homeworld. She showed them footage of New Haven burning. She made them watch what their military had done. Then she gave them an ultimatum. Surrender everyone responsible for the attack. Pay reparations to the survivors. Accept full responsibility for genocide, or watch their homeworld suffer the same fate as New Haven. They had 24 hours to decide. The Zalthine government collapsed within 12 hours of Admiral Brooks's ultimatum. The civilian population, who had believed their empire was invincible, watched their military burn and realized they had no choice. Protests erupted across the homeworld. Citizens demanded answers. How could this happen? How could the mighty Zalthine Empire be defeated by the species they had dismissed as primitive? High Commander Vrektar tried to maintain control, but his own military commanders turned against him. Generals who had once followed his orders now saw him as the architect of their destruction. They arrested him in his command center and contacted the human fleet. They offered complete surrender. They would hand over everyone responsible for New Haven. They would accept any terms Earth demanded. Captain Jake Morrison received the prisoners aboard the Vengeance. War Marshal Thakran was joined by a dozen other Zalthine officials, the officers and politicians who had planned and executed the New Haven massacre. They were placed in holding cells designed for their species. Jake looked at them through the transparent walls and felt empty. This was what justice looked like. It did not feel triumphant. It just felt necessary. Admiral Helen Brooks broadcast a message to Earth. The mission was complete. The Zalthine Empire had surrendered unconditionally. Everyone responsible for New Haven was in custody. The fleet would return home soon. President Daniel Carter received the news and addressed the United Earth Assembly. There were no celebrations. People were satisfied but exhausted. They had spent 18 months living for revenge. Now it was over. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session. They could no longer ignore what was happening. Ambassador Laura Mitchell received an urgent summons to appear before them. This time she traveled to the Council station with 2 human warships as escorts. The gesture was deliberate. Humanity would never again appear before the Council without the backing of military force. The Council chamber erupted in chaos when Laura entered. The Vorath representative, a tall being with crystalline skin, immediately accused Earth of violating 17 different galactic warfare conventions. The nanoplague warheads alone violated 3 separate treaties. The gravity well generators were banned technology. The hunter drones constituted weapons of terror prohibited by Council law. The Kellan ambassador, a creature that resembled a floating jellyfish, declared that humanity had proven themselves to be barbaric warmongers. They had destroyed Zalthine military infrastructure with excessive force. They had refused diplomatic solutions. They had ignored Council authority. Earth should be sanctioned, possibly even quarantined from the rest of the galaxy. Other Council members added their voices. The Droon complained about the disruption to trade routes. The Velix worried about the precedent this set. If every species could wage private wars of revenge, the entire galactic order would collapse. Species after species spoke against humanity, their fear disguised as moral outrage. High Commander Rektar attended the session via hologram from his prison cell on the Zalthine homeworld. He looked diminished, defeated, but still tried to maintain some dignity. He begged the Council to intervene. He claimed the Zalthine Empire had acted within their rights to defend their borders. He insisted that Earth's response was disproportionate and criminal. Laura Mitchell stood at the center of the Council chamber and listened to it all. She waited until every species had finished speaking. Then she addressed them in a voice that carried across the vast room. She spoke calmly, but everyone could hear the steel beneath her words. She began by playing footage from New Haven. The Council had seen it before, but she made them watch again. Cities burning, people running, children screaming. The images played on every screen in the chamber. Some Council members looked away. Laura demanded they watch. This was what the Zalthine had done. This was what the Council had dismissed with a symbolic censure. Laura described coming to this very chamber 18 months ago, begging for justice. She reminded them how they had voted, how they had decided that human lives did not matter enough to challenge Zalthine power, how they had told Earth to accept the loss and move on. She spoke about the 2.26 million dead, about families destroyed, about a future that was stolen. Then she addressed the accusations against humanity. Yes, Earth had used banned weapons. Yes, they had violated warfare conventions. She asked the Council a simple question. What good were conventions and treaties when they only protected the strong? What value did galactic law have when it allowed genocide to go unpunished? The Council had shown humanity that in this galaxy, rules only applied to those too weak to break them. The chamber fell silent. Laura continued. Earth had learned a valuable lesson from the Council. Mercy was perceived as weakness. Justice had to be taken, not asked for. Diplomacy only worked when backed by the willingness to use force. These were the lessons the galaxy had taught humanity. The Council had no one to blame but themselves for what happened next. The Vorath representative tried to interrupt, threatening sanctions and military intervention. Laura laughed, and the sound was bitter. She reminded them that Earth's fleet had just defeated the Zalthine, who possessed the second-largest military in the galaxy. She asked the Vorath if they really wanted to test themselves against human weapons. She asked the Kellan if they thought their fleets could survive nanoplague warheads and gravity well generators. Laura made it perfectly clear, if the Galactic Council interfered with Earth's pursuit of justice, humanity would consider it an act of war. Earth was not threatening conquest or expansion. They only wanted what the Council should have given them 18 months ago. Recognition that the New Haven massacre was genocide, accountability for those responsible, and a guarantee that no species would ever again attack humanity without consequences. The Council delegates argued among themselves. Some wanted to challenge Earth's ultimatum. Others, more practical, recognized that humanity had proven their military capabilities. The galaxy had changed. A new power had emerged, one that played by different rules. Admiral Helen Brooks, still in orbit around the Zalthine homeworld, waited for the Council's response. Her fleet remained on high alert. If the Council chose confrontation, Earth was ready to fight again. She had no desire for more war, but she would not back down. Not after everything they had sacrificed. Ambassador Laura Mitchell presented Earth's formal demands to the Council. First, the Galactic Council must officially recognize the New Haven attack as unprovoked genocide. Second, the Zalthine Empire would pay reparations to the survivors and families of the victims for 50 years. Third, all parties responsible for ordering and executing the attack would face trial under a joint Human Council tribunal. Fourth, and most importantly, Earth demanded a permanent seat on the Galactic Council with full veto power. The chamber exploded in outrage. A permanent seat was reserved for species with thousands of years of space travel experience. Earth had barely been exploring beyond their solar system for a century. The idea of giving humanity veto power was unthinkable. They were too young, too aggressive, too unpredictable. Laura stood firm. Earth had proven they could defend themselves. They had proven they would not tolerate injustice. If the Council wanted peace with humanity, these were the terms. If the Council refused, Earth would continue to act independently, and the galaxy would have to deal with a hostile power that possessed weapons capable of destroying empires. The Council called for a recess. Delegates gathered in private chambers to debate. The older species resisted, clinging to their traditional power structures. The younger species saw an opportunity. If Earth could force its way onto the Council, maybe others could too. The balance of galactic politics was shifting. 48 hours later, the Council reconvened. The vote was called. One by one, species cast their decisions. Some voted against Earth's demands, but others, calculating the odds, voted in favor. When the final tally was complete, Earth's demands had passed by the narrowest possible margin. Ambassador Laura Mitchell accepted the Council's decision with grace, but no gratitude. She knew this was not acceptance born from respect for humanity's values. This was submission born from fear of humanity's weapons. But it did not matter. Earth had what it needed: a voice that would be heard, power that would be respected, and insurance that New Haven would never happen again. High Commander Rektar watched the proceedings from his cell and understood that his empire's age of dominance had ended. The Zalthine had been powerful for 3,000 years, but they had grown arrogant. They had forgotten that every empire eventually faces a reckoning. Humanity had been theirs. President Daniel Carter received the news from Laura. Earth had a council seat. The terms of justice were accepted. The war was truly over. He addressed the planet one more time, thanking everyone for their sacrifice and dedication. He promised that the victims of New Haven would never be forgotten. Their memory would shape humanity's future among the stars. 6 months after the Zalthine surrender, the galaxy had settled into a new reality. Earth held its first official session as a full member of the Galactic Council. Ambassador Laura Mitchell took her seat in the chamber, flanked by 2 human security officers in full ceremonial armor. The message was subtle but clear. Humanity came to the Council as equals, not supplicants. Admiral Helen Brooks attended the session from the observation gallery. She wore her dress uniform, medals from the Zalthine campaign displayed on her chest. The other council delegates glanced at her with a mixture of fear and respect. This was the woman who had brought an empire to its knees. Her presence reminded everyone of what humanity was capable of when pushed too far. The trial of War Marshal Thokren and High Commander Vrektar became the most watched event in galactic history. Billions of beings across hundreds of worlds tuned in to watch the proceedings. The trial was held on Earth in Geneva, at the same complex where the United Earth Assembly met. The symbolism was intentional. Justice for human victims would be delivered in a human court. Dr. Nathan Cross testified about the technology Earth had offered to share with the Galactic Council before New Haven. Advanced warning systems that could have prevented any territorial misunderstandings. Communication protocols that would have made conflict resolution easier. Earth had come to the galaxy offering friendship and innovation. The Zalthine had responded with genocide. Commander Lisa Hayes presented the intelligence she had gathered. Maps showing New Haven's location in neutral space, far from any Zalthine territorial claims. Communication records proving the Zalthine military had fabricated the justification for their attack. Testimony from Zalthine officers who admitted they had followed orders to destroy the colony as a demonstration of power. Thokren sat in the defendant's chair, his forearms shackled. He looked smaller somehow, diminished without his fleet and authority. His defense tried to argue that he was a soldier following orders, that the decision to attack New Haven came from High Commander Vrektar and the Zalthine civilian government. It did not matter. The tribunal found him guilty of genocide, war crimes, and crimes against sentient life. High Commander Vrektar showed no remorse during his trial. He maintained that the Zalthine Empire had the right to defend their territory as they saw fit. He claimed that younger species needed to be taught respect for galactic powers. He argued that if the Council had properly disciplined humanity earlier, the entire tragedy could have been avoided. His arrogance was breathtaking. The tribunal deliberated for 3 days. The verdict was unanimous, guilty on all charges. The sentence, however, surprised many observers. Earth did not demand execution. Instead, Thokren, Vrektar, and the other convicted Zalthine officials were sentenced to life imprisonment. They would spend their remaining years helping to rebuild New Haven, working alongside human engineers and colonists to restore what they had destroyed. Captain Jake Morrison watched the sentencing from the courtroom gallery. Part of him wanted harsher punishment, wanted the Zalthine to suffer as his people had suffered, but another part of him understood the wisdom of Earth's decision. Death would have been too easy, too quick, making them face their crimes every day, making them contribute to healing the wound they had inflicted. That was real justice. After the trial concluded, Jake retired from military service. He received offers to command new ships, to train the next generation of officers, but he declined them all. He had fought his war. Now he wanted to build something instead of destroying. He returned to what remained of New Haven. The planet was still scarred from the bombardment, but life was returning. Using funds from the Zalthine reparations, Earth had launched a massive reconstruction effort. Engineers worked to restore the atmosphere. Biologists reintroduced plant and animal life. Architects designed new cities that would rise from the ashes of the old. Lieutenant Sophie Grant joined Jake on New Haven. She had also retired from the military after the Zalthine campaign. Together, they led the reconstruction effort. Sophie focused on designing the memorial for the 2.26 million victims, a vast plaza in what had been the colony's capital, with the name of every person who died carved in stone. The memorial would ensure the galaxy never forgot what happened here. Jake oversaw the practical work of rebuilding. New homes, schools, hospitals, all the infrastructure a colony needed. The first new settlers arrived 3 months into the reconstruction. They were mostly survivors from the original colony, people who had evacuated with Jake 18 months earlier. They came home to a scarred world, but also to a determined community. Sergeant Ryan Tucker chose a different path. He accepted a position as chief instructor at Earth's new military academy on Mars. His job was to train the next generation of human warriors, to teach them the lessons learned from the Zalthine campaign. But Ryan's lessons were not about aggression or conquest. He taught restraint, responsibility, and the principle that strength must serve justice. His students learned about the weapons Earth had developed, The nanoplague warheads and gravity well generators and hunter drones. They learned how effective these weapons were and how much destruction they could cause. Then Ryan showed them footage from New Haven and explained why Earth had been forced to create such terrible tools. He made sure every student understood that power without purpose was tyranny. President Daniel Carter and Admiral Helen Brooks oversaw Earth's expansion into the galaxy. New colonies were established on a dozen worlds, but this time they were protected by powerful defense fleets. Every human settlement had orbital stations armed with the latest weapons technology. The galaxy had taught humanity that peace required strength, and Earth would never again be caught unprepared. Other species, who had once dismissed humanity as primitive, now sought Earth as an ally. Trade agreements were signed. Defense treaties were negotiated. The Droon, who had complained about disrupted trade routes during the war, now partnered with human merchants. The Velex, who had feared humanity's weapons, now requested joint military exercises to learn from human tactics. Even the Vorath and Kelon, who had been Earth's harshest critics in the Council, quietly approached Ambassador Laura Mitchell with offers of cooperation. They never apologized for their earlier positions, but their actions spoke clearly enough. They understood that the galaxy had changed and that opposing humanity was dangerous. The Galactic Council operated differently now. For 3,000 years, the older species had dominated every decision. They had maintained the status quo, protected their interests, and dismissed the concerns of younger civilizations. Earth's presence disrupted this comfortable arrangement. Laura Mitchell ensured that humanity's voice carried weight in every debate. She proposed new legislation protecting developing species from exploitation. Using Earth's experience as justification, she argued for reforms that would prevent another New Haven. Some older council members resisted, but Laura reminded them of what happened when injustice went unpunished. The reforms passed. The Zalthian Empire never recovered its former power. The reparations payments drained their economy. Their military was reduced to a fraction of its previous size. Young Zalthine, who came of age after the war, looked at humanity with wary respect rather than contempt. They learned about New Haven in their schools, about how arrogance and cruelty had brought their empire to ruin. Commander Lisa Hayes continued her intelligence work, but now from an official position as Earth's Director of Galactic Security. She maintained networks of contacts across known space, monitoring potential threats and opportunities. Her job was to ensure humanity never faced another surprise attack. The early warning systems that could have prevented New Haven were now deployed across all human space. Dr. Nathan Cross returned to academic research, but his work had changed. He no longer studied weapons, but instead focused on defensive technologies, force fields that could protect colonies from orbital bombardment, emergency evacuation systems that could save millions in minutes. He spent the rest of his career making sure Earth could defend its people without resorting to the terrible weapons he had created. 2 years after the trial, Ambassador Laura Mitchell stood on the observation deck of Earth's Council Station. She looked out at the stars and thought about everything that had happened. Commander Lisa Hayes joined her, the two women standing in comfortable silence for a moment. Lisa finally spoke, asking if Laura thought humanity would ever be truly accepted by the galaxy, or if they would always be seen as brutal outsiders who had forced their way to power through violence. It was a question that had troubled many people on Earth. Laura considered her response carefully. She acknowledged that some species would always fear humanity, would always remember the Zalthine campaign with horror, but fear and respect were intertwined in galactic politics. Earth had not sought this reputation, but they had earned it through necessity. She spoke about how humanity had approached the Council in peace, offering friendship and cooperation. The galaxy had responded with dismissal and then genocide. Earth had been forced to teach a harsh lesson. When humans were pushed to the edge, when their families were murdered and justice was denied, they would push back harder than anyone imagined possible. Lisa asked if that made Earth the